so that the scale, we can talk about scale as one of our next topics. So let me just find a perfect spot to put this where you'll be able to see this painting a lot better. Still not fantastic. Let me keep working on this while we're talking. Anyway, I often get asked how to go from like a regular size painting to a large painting. So that's what I'm going to work on today, is how we change our scale. And hi Amelia. Hi Sophie. So yeah, scale is something that when I teach a workshop on how to paint large, we can always revert back to, a few methods that we walk through. But, let me put the microphone on. But if we are to take any painting, hi Maria, if we take any painting and we want to make it larger, or let's say you're a short story writer and now you want to write a novel, we have to know how to kind of break down the barriers of what we already do and and how we do them. So if you look up on the internet any tips for how to paint large, they'll tell you change the size of your tools, change the size of your of whatever it is you're working on, right? It's scale. So obviously for a writer or something, the process would be different than one second. How do you do the white flowers on the animal? Oh, okay. So I'll talk to you about that in a second. So we're going to be talking about how to go larger, and if you have any questions related to that, or if you want to share comments with others, share maybe what your comfortable size is, what size you aspire to go to, or whatever it is you're working on. I know a lot of people who are watching who are messaging me and emailing me and things. You're saying that you're finding it's a hard time to get creative, and I would tell you that I get that 100%, which is why I discipline myself to be in here every day at 12 o'clock to do open studio with you guys, because it is a discipline. It's really tough out there right now. It's tough to get our head wrapped around what's going on. And I thought maybe I would tackle a new topic, which is exaggeration, meaning painting larger, going larger. If you make greeting cards, maybe now you want to make greeting cards on a commercial level. I don't know, whatever it is, you want to translate that into a larger format. That's what we'll be talking about over the next few days. Make sure my microphone's still plugged in. Yep, we're good. Okay, so yeah, how did I do the flowers here? So this board it's huge that you guys are only seeing a portion of it, because I can't, I could put this back even further, and let's see how that looks. I'll keep going here. Not bad. Hi Tracy, don't you have to be working? There we go. So I think that's a little bit better. Okay, awesome. So yeah, we're talking about going bigger, right? Changing the scale of what it is you do, whether it's quantity or actual physical size. I think that's a good topic for a little while, because a lot of people will have that question for me when they see how large this painting is. So first thing I had to do was, I use a lot of my own photographs, and this is this baby moose that I took a picture of. Isn't he freaking cute? He's adorable. The thing is, he was walking, and he was walking on the side of the road in Jasper, and that's where all the cool animals hang out. And I'm kidding, I just happened to get a lot of pictures there. Anyway, so he was walking along the side of the road with his mama, and it was just really cute. And so anyway, we had to stop because all the traffic was stopped, and so I climbed out of the sunroof again and got a picture of him walking. So there's a lot of camera shake, there's a lot of that stuff going on, and that's only because he was walking on the side of the road. So the flowers are actually part of the photograph because he was walking along the side of the road through some weeds and some tall grasses and things. And this part, it was funny because when I did this picture, or when I had it printed, I actually had to consider whether or not when I'm painting it, if I'm going to paint out the flowers and just keep the body of the animal, or if I'm actually going to extend the flowers down. So that was still a choice that's yet to be made. But so scale, speaking of scale, Susan says, love your animal pictures taken in Jasper. That's where you're born. Oh, so lucky. Hi, Rochelle. So yeah, so we've got this this baby moose, which is just really sweet, and I had to have it printed large because we're talking about scale, right? So if I had a regular size picture, which is 8.5 by 11, if I can grab something here to illustrate my point, then you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So on, I'll just grab this sheet of paper because it's 8.5 by 11. But if all this panel, right, which is 36 by 48, so it's 3 feet by 4 feet, big panel. If my image had only been this big, which is the size of an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, this one might be easier to look at, you'll see that I've got a whole lot of space that I need to fill. So what I did was I collaged the entire background first with maps. So you can't really see it because we haven't done a close-up yet, but there's actually maps in the background that are visible only in some areas where the paint's really thin, or whether the pattern paper is over top and you see the map in the background. And then I've collaged in some other papers, and then I collaged in my moose, and then I started to paint around everything with some white chalk paint. So the reason that I pulled this painting out was for scale, so we'd have something to talk about, how to take your pictures bigger, or how to make your paintings bigger. But one of the things that I would point out for me works really well is changing the scale of everything. So when I look at a piece of paper this big, I'm like, that's great for color, that's great for whatever, but I'm going to save it in my pile for later, because when I'm doing my initial collage, I'm not going to grab anything that isn't 4 feet long, kind of thing, right? So, hi Denise. So I would use wrapping paper. I would use printed papers, right? So I would use things that are already the scale of the painting I'm working with. So when I did the maps on here, because I have these maps that had been given to me, and so I put those in the background, and then immediately the whole painting was covered, right? Because I had this map glued in the background. So once I had the map in the background, I could have gone any which direction I wanted, but I still didn't want the map to be anything other than background. So you know me, when I start painting and I start scratching through to the layers, rather than just having wood underneath, I'm actually going to scrape back to a map, and maybe when I peel the paper, I'll reveal a little section, which is like in, I don't know, like maybe it'll have some words, or maybe it'll have some text, or it'll have something interesting that somehow will relate to this story. It always does. So that's that. So my first thing is to not grab any, because my technique, right, is collage first, and background collage first. Hi Rhonda. Hi Terry. So working large for me means only working with papers that are going to cover the surface quickly, right? So I'm going to use big papers. See, I could just glue like a layer of this, and then glue a layer of that, and then the end result would be that my board would be immediately covered. If you are a painter, and you don't do collage or whatever it is, then what I tend to do is, and I have an example here that I can show you. Let me grab it. So when I'm painting, I often paint on raw canvas, and that's just so that I can take it outside. So this is a raw canvas that has everything but the kitchen sink on it. Try and open it up. It's got all kinds of texture. It's got sand. It's got paint. It's got scratches. It's got everything. It's not a painting yet. It is just the canvas that I'm working on. But I do this so that I can work outside in the summertime on the grass. I often use house paints or anything like that. I just dump stuff on, spread it around, see what happens, scratch into it, let the sun dry it. If I want to peel some of it off, I take a garden hose and I just soak it all down, let the drips happen. I do these pieces outside, and then I have these massive canvases that are ready for me one day to complete. And I don't usually complete them until they get stretched onto a canvas stretcher. So, but scale is everything. So when I paint with paint, I can't be tight right at the beginning, because if I'm tight right at the beginning, maybe I'll get a little section about this big done, right? Like maybe I'll get 6 inches, 12 inches done. But on a massive piece, that's going to take me weeks and weeks and weeks, and I'm going to lose interest in this painting before too long, because that's me. So what I do is I make sure that the whole surface gets covered the first day. Okay? Hi, Heather. So we're talking about scale here, and so my trick, my tried and true trick for every single painting I always do, doesn't matter what the size is, doesn't matter what the scale is, before I quit for that day. So if I'm gonna put, I don't know, an hour or two into beginning a painting, I always make sure that the entire surface is covered before I pack it in for the day. And whether that be with paint or gesso or collage or texture, whatever it is, I make sure that the entire thing is covered. The reason for that is because when I come back at it the next day, or whenever I get back to that painting, this one's been done started for a long time, I now have something to respond to. If I still had this massive unfinished piece with, one little section that I've started, drawing a face or something, then I get discouraged, because I feel like hi Lindsay, because it's an hour-long journey to just getting to the starting place. So for me, the starting place needs to be that the entire surface is covered first. So that's a suggestion I would give to anyone, no matter what size you're working on. And today we're talking about scale, right? Going a lot bigger. I would make sure that if I were to give you the first piece of advice, it's that dedicate the time to make sure you cover your entire surface first. Like I said, that could be a big paint spill, that could be scribbling, that could be collage, it could be whatever you want it to be, but don't leave the surface blank when you're leaving or when you're putting your brushes down for the day. And then another rule of thumb that which is aside from painting large, it's always my philosophy, is that when you're putting your brushes down for the day, I always leave my paintings wet. And what that means is dry time is essential to mixed media, especially mixed media with encaustic, right? So allowing your paintings that time to fully dry is really important. So when I say leave it wet, don't leave it at a point where you're just frustrated, everything's dry, and you walk away. That's certainly not gonna help. What I would suggest is put a glaze over it, put some paint over it, put some drips, do something where it physically has to dry. And maybe it's just like a psychological thing I do, but to me it definitely is a good rule of thumb, because I know that, like, if I were to do this painting and I didn't have any drips in it, or I didn't have anything in the painting as it were, if I were to come back to it later and I went, oh, okay, now I have to do drips, I actually can't do drips and then continue to do something else that isn't going to interfere with the wetness of the drips. Okay, so I know that was a sort of a bit of an aside, but let's get painting. So, so when I stand back and I look at something big, it's easy to feel overwhelmed because I haven't looked at this painting for a long time, and to me, it's feeling really bare for my taste, but it's also feeling really almost finished for my taste. So I always struggle between this when is too much in a painting, and I'm sure some of you can either relate to that or you know the feeling when you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And it's not that I feel that in this one, it's just that I feel like I could easily take it there. So I'm gonna go ahead and wet my whole surface of paint. I don't need to wet the collage necessarily, where the mousse is, unless I wanted to do scratches and stuff through here. But what I really want to do is, in order to get that paint to a place where I can do some scratching and stuff through it, I actually need to soften that paint a little bit. So even though it's been dry for weeks, I'm going to need to just kind of reactivate the paint a little bit, and it won't make it run or anything like that, but it will soften it up. So that's one of my first steps. And then the second thing that I want to talk about is, if you're intimidated to make a first mark ever, or if you don't know, you're questioning and you don't have a teacher right there that you can ask the question to, should I paint all this part out black? There's a fun little function on your phone, which I can't show you because my phone is doing the recording for this. But if you take a photo and then you look at your photo, and in the upper right corner after you press edit, there's those three little dots. So click on those little dots and then you're going to hit markup. So I go to markup, and then I generally choose the fattest marker and then the fattest brush stroke. That's what I always start with. And then I choose a color. I'm like, maybe it needs some black. So then on the photo, I'll just paint the top black, and then I'll look at it and I'll go, yeah, actually that improved it a lot. So I can either save it or whatever. I generally take the eraser and I get rid of that. And I'm like, what if I were to make that whole top part red? And then I'll change it to red, and I'll put like solid red. I'm like, no, maybe it's too heavy. Then maybe I'll adjust how fat of a brush stroke I've made, and then I'll make it skinnier, and then I'll do a scribble, and I'm like, that looks cute, but I don't like the red. So then I'll change the color and that sort of thing. So you understand what I'm talking about markup, right? So I'm just actually digitally marking up the image in case I'm afraid to make a move. So I'm one of those people who is not generally afraid to make any moves because, hi Barb, because I believe that every layer, right, is important to the overall piece. So that's not going to help a lot of people if you just watch me paint, because that is my nature. I tend to just like go crazy at things. Thanks, Lindsay. It is a great idea. It's a great idea because it works. It's a great tool for when we're afraid to make that next move. And Lindsay's a photographer, so you actually probably even have even more tools at your disposal. I know other people have told me about different apps that they've installed where they've got more markup abilities, and they can add different layers and different, and that's not something that I have I don't have the desire to do it, because if I just want to try, let's say, a checkerboard pattern, I'll actually just paint the checkerboard pattern, and then I'll stand back and go, nope, that didn't work, and then I'll paint over it. So that works for me, but people who have the ability and the tools and the technique and the inclination to do that ahead of time, then go for it. It could be part of your process, and it could be really, really great. So, oh, I was bad. I didn't wash my brushes on the weekend. Tisk, tisk. And I've got these crunchy, misshapen brushes that I left in water. Anyway, so, one technique that I think I've developed, or that an inclination of mine, is to, when I'm painting a photo, around a photo, especially if it's busy, I didn't want to cut out the moose like, you know, perfectly. I wanted to have a bit of the background, and that's only so that my line actually comes up here. And so the reason I did that is because I don't want a lot of this stuff to distract you from the actual moose. So what I'm doing is I've just used a bit of watered down chalk paint, and I'm just going to go in and I'm going to highlight the, I hate to call it this, but I'm going to highlight the outline, or sort of erase that outline by painting it in with a darker wash of black. So for me, I'm creating just less distraction around the moose, but I don't want to paint him, like in my case, I don't want to paint him solid black, because then he'll look a little bit out of context. He might just look like a cartoon character. So I'm just painting out the distracting white bits. And where I have paper coming off, generally I would use a scraper or a blade or sandpaper or something, and I would get rid of that edge. I'm just going to pull some of that paper out because I didn't collage it down very well in that spot. To me it looked a little funny, so I'm just removing it. So another great way later on to cut the distraction of that is to put wax over it, but at the early stages I'm just going to go ahead and remove some of that paper. So I just have to find out where his actual snout is. It's already, I don't know if you guys can see that from where you are, but from where I am, it's already making him pop a little bit, just because I'm allowing that photograph to stand out a bit more. So I'm making it a little easier on the viewer to be able to pick out the image, right? Without completely painting it out black and losing my my lines, my outline, if you will. Too much water, so now it's dripping a little bit. So if that was something that were to bother you, now you would go in there and just dry those up with a paper towel. You could catch them with a paper towel roll. If anybody's ever seen me do that, I usually just have one paper towel roll that I just go in and roll over the surface, and that helps me collect water. And every once in a while you can remove like the outer layer. It's still usable, it's just now it's more absorbent. So I keep one roll that I just roll to collect water. And now I'm going to go in. There we go. And like I said, darken this all up. Give him a little more visibility. So if any of you do large collage, you can't see it, but I'm going to tell you I have a massive air bubble right here. And if it wasn't important or integral to the overall design, I might be inclined to just scratch it off. But it's quite a big bubble, and I'm afraid that I might lose the integrity of the image. So this is what I call a little bit of surgery. So I'm going to show you how you would fix something like that if you want to fix an air bubble. There we go. So I'm not liking my brush strokes up here, so that's why I'm just going back in with a bit of a dry brush. roughing this up because I want the background to look a little more consistent, and I may have gone a little overboard with my white paint. And then also around the fur, I'm trying not to get too specific because I don't want it to look, oh, another air bubble. I don't want it to look too contrived again and like fake fur. Right, so I'm just trying to keep it loose. And he's got a great little shadow behind his leg here. So I'll move this. I'm not sure if you guys will be able to see it. I'm gonna read a comment here. Rust-Oleum chalk paint, yes or no? I would say no. So that's, I always just look at it as, is it available in a hardware store? And what is the primary purpose? So, so the ones that have been developed and are being sold through paint stores, more like a Benjamin Moore and, you know, dedicated paint stores, then they tend to be more developed for furniture. And so, I'm just going to get rid of that. So the Rust-Oleum one is actually just kind of like, I apologize to anybody who's like a true Rust-Oleum fan. I have no problem with it. It's just what it is. They haven't come up with a new paint. They have taken an existing paint, which is either an acrylic or a latex-based paint, and they've put in an additive, right, to make it chalky. So this, it's still the same paint. So Rust-Oleum, I wouldn't know, is it latex, is it acrylic, whatever it is as a base, it's still the same paint, and then they've just like added. So that would be the same as making a home-based chalk paint, and there's a lot of tutorials out there on how to do that too, on how to add plaster Paris, how to add grout, how to add all kinds of stuff. And I bought into all that at the beginning too, and I made all those, and then I realized that it wasn't as, it will work initially, but later on I've noticed the cracking starting to happen and or the chipping, and where I am I have to be concerned about in the wintertime not moving a painting that's got an unstable base. I can't tell if I've sent it to somebody also in the mail, like if somebody's bought a painting, if I've shipped it to someone and they would tell me, oh, it's got a big crack in it or it's missing a bit of the wax, I can't go and fix it. So the yes or no to that is I would say no for our purposes. If you're painting furniture or you're repainting your bike or whatever it is that they say it's good for, go for it because it's probably a great product. Just for what I'm doing, I don't like it. Okay, so I'm getting into this leg, which my painting, or my photograph cuts off. And so what I'm left with is kind of make it up, right? Like fill in the blanks. And it's actually kind of fun in this picture because I don't know if it's anatomically correct, but it looks good, so I'm just going to go for it. If you make a mistake and you realize that, you know, the leg you just put in there didn't really work, then what I do is I tend to just spray a lot of water and fake it out. So, like in here, I'm not really sure where that leg goes, so you know, I'm just going to spread some water on here and let this whole area become like almost very abstract, right? Like I knew what I was doing, I just didn't feel like doing it. Instead of, I have no clue what the back legs are going to look like, so I just had to improvise. We never have to reveal to our viewers that we didn't actually know what we were doing. There. So you can see with the, I don't know, can you guys see down that part? Yeah, you can. So with the little bit of water, the way it's running through here and around here, it actually kind of looks like I said, like I know what I'm doing, right? So I might even just spray a few drips down here just to really solidify this abstract nature of this background. Now the other area that I was talking about at the beginning, that Sophie was asking me about these flowers. So my inclination is to keep the flowers, but I could paint them in, I suppose. How am I going to make them look natural? I have no idea. Like, I could spend the time to sit there and, you know, maybe photocopy this and then put another layer of it down here and blend the two and fake it out. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to black it out for now in a bit of an abstract fashion. And then I'm feeling that when I get into the wax, I'll just carve some lines in there, and then that way I'll be able to put the patina, the white oil paint, white oil stick, whatever, into the grooves. And then if I'm doing it on the bottom as well, then I could make it look a little more natural. So I feel that my abilities would probably be better served over here in wax than they would be in the chalk paint. But we'll see where it goes. Like, I could change my mind, but for now, let's just say I'm going to change that out. So the other thing I feel a little more inclined to do is to darken the bottom. So again, that's something that if you're doing markup on your phone, you'd be able to see how the background looks if you blank it out. I don't know, for me it just feels good. I don't know what's going to happen to it, but for now, this is what it is. So I'm going to put a little more of the scumbling. That's what this is called, when you just kind of randomly dry brush over top and create some random marks. And that's only to mimic the grasses and things that we have going in the background, because where you see my brush strokes, it's not very pretty. Oops, there goes his tail. Okay, so let me show you the surgery that I'm going to perform in a few of these little bubble areas, because I think that they're important to the overall picture. There we go. Okay, so now I'm just finding that the fur looks a little fake. Oops, the fur looks a little fake, so I'm just scribbling in a very dry, dirty brush, which is kind of mimicking like a furry border. I'm not going to painstakingly go in there and draw every hair and that sort of thing, but I'm just trying to make it look a wee bit more natural instead of having a really hard edge. Okay, so that's that. That looks good. So the surgery. So you want to get a blade that's clean. Okay, so you guys are helping out Heather find chalk paints that are readily available. Okay, so this one here is a big, whoops, a big bubble. So I've just cut, and I'm using the blade, and I'm peeling the paper away. Go. So cut the paper, and then also where his tail is, I've got another little spot, but my paper's a little wet there, so I'm just going to be a little more careful with it. And I'm just peeling away. So this spot actually is peeling, but it's not necessary to have it in my, like, it doesn't affect whether or not the image is going to be distorted, because it's outside of the image, so I don't mind removing some of that paper. It's not integral to my design, right? So I'm going to remove some of my bubbles that don't matter. I have a lot up here, but we'll deal with those ones afterwards. So when I wet the paint initially, this is what's happening. Now any area that has a natural bubble, what it's doing is the paper underneath has gotten wet and now it's bubbling up, so I'm able to see where the bubbles are. So it's actually helping me provide a more stable base. I don't mind a lot of bubbles, I just want it to be really integral at the end of the day, that the whole design not only makes sense, but that it's not going to fall apart for someone who actually buys it. So, yeah, some of these will have to go. But, okay, so while I'm waiting for, oh yeah, no, sorry, let me get back to the gluing. So I need to fix that, right? That's where we were. I am desperately low on any kind of glue in my studio, so I too am going to have to go scavenging for art supplies later on. As many of you know, what I tend to use a lot for my gluing, if not I'll just go over it now with you, is I tend to use matte Mod Podge a lot, but more often than not, it's just easier for me if I'm mixing any type of white glue or matte Mod Podge. Matte Mod Podge just doesn't have that shininess that white glue has, but in a pinch, white glue is fine. In with mostly the pre-mixed wallpaper paste. So the pre-mixed wallpaper paste, I like the consistency of it better than the powder, but in a pinch I'll use the powder, no problem. I just have to mix it myself. And then I add a little bit of glue. So I take the original container, which I usually buy a pail of it, and then I just pour in, like, fill it up to the top with white glue. So there's no real secret formula why I'm adding the glue to it or the Mod Podge to it. It's just that the wallpaper paste doesn't have any acrylic in it, any latex in it. It's just complete cellulose, which is like a, it's like making, you know, paste glue out of flour. So when I put my flour and water, there's a good idea too. So any kind of a paste that doesn't have any glue in it is really great, except if I were to spray it with water, the whole thing will come peeling off. That's the reason you can strip wallpaper, right? Is because it's not actually glued to the wall. So by adding a little bit of glue to it, when that glue dries, it actually makes the that paper have a little more binding to it. Hi Margaret. It has a little more binder in it than actually just the wallpaper paste on its own. So now I'm going to go in with just my straight up Mod Podge, only because that's all I have available at this moment. And I'm just using a brush and I'm forcing the glue as far as it wants to go under the paper. I'm going to let that sit for a second before gluing it up. And then the same over on this little spot where I had to fix things up. And I'll push the paper down in this case because that was a much smaller tear. And now I think this has had a little bit of air. So I'm going to push those pieces of paper down and then seal it all up. I'm going to try not to leave a lot of glue on the surface because this is an acrylic-based glue. So once I get that done, I'm going to take my baby wipe and just go back in and remove the glue from the surface. So in this case, remembering I'm not trying for perfection, I'm not trying to get rid of any crazy lines or bubbles or anything else because I'm still very early in my process. So a little bit of scratching here and there, a little bit of holes, a little bit of tears, that's all good. But the only thing I can't have going on at this point of the painting is having bubbles right in my image where it's kind of distracting and it looks a little unstable. So now I'm going to go in with my big vat of goo, as I call it, right? So this is just where I clean brushes, and sometimes I put a little walnut ink in here, sometimes a little chalk paint, and it tends to be like a stain of like a brown color. I haven't had to replenish this for a while, so it's still the same color. And I like to fill in paper tears with it. So anywhere where the paper is white, to me it just stains the edges really naturally, so I don't have, so it doesn't look unfinished. So And because torn paper is super absorbent, it will take on that little bit of color, and I just find it really pleasing. So I'll put my big vat of goo up here, maybe some drips of it too, because it's always a fun color. And then maybe I'll put some down here, because this is already somewhat dry. Some down here. There. It's a nice natural color. Never the same twice, right? Because it's always, I just get adding into it. So at the end of the day, I'll clean my brush in there as well. Hi, Margot. Yeah, so that's that. So now I need to remove all that because it doesn't always look that appealing. So now I'm going to go in with my baby wipe, and I'm going to remove a lot of that stain, and only because it is meant to be a stain, it's not meant to be a paint, right? So there's a lot of water in it, and it keeps, it'll keep the whole area really moist for a long time, and I don't want that. I want to be able to keep working. So I'm just going to remove a lot of the surface and let it stain where it may stain. But it just, like I said, it just makes white and gray a bit warmer. It's not a heavy surface stain. My baby wipes are always being put to use. Raw paper, absorbent paper, as you can see, takes on the stain really, really well. So if you don't want it to stain that area, you'll have to avoid areas and be a little more specific than I am when I'm using it. But now I'm using a cleaner baby wipe to get back a little bit of that white surface. It doesn't really matter because I'm going to be painting over it anyway, but I'm just going to peel back as much as I can so it doesn't look too dirty. Remember, I'm going for warm and natural, not super dirty or super obvious. Why do you not trim paper close to the mousse? Is it easier to integrate? Yes, for me, I like a little bit of that background because I want it to look more natural. If I cut it out, picture a cartoon character that has an outline. That to me is how they always end up looking. If you cut it out really close, especially an animal that has fur and sort of more undefined borders. It's like hair, right? Like if you're cutting out the picture of a person and they have curly hair, you can kind of get close, but if you were to cut around every curl, it looks a little more cartoon-like, a little more cut and paste than just going out bigger and then integrating it with paint. So because this was taken, like the photograph wasn't crisp, clear, defined borders, it was really difficult. So that's why I did it really, I gave it a good 2-inch border all the way around. And another great example, and I see this all the time with people, is when they cut out trees. So when somebody cuts out a tree, they tend to follow the bark, and then they just do these big round bubbles around the branches. Well, when you look at a tree, it's not a big bubble, right? It may visually look like that, but you know those borders are very fluid and very light and very heavy in some spots, and they have so much movement, and when we create a hard edge, we're encapsulating it and it looks more like a cartoon. So that's why I tend to include my background more often than not and then paint it out. So I could have actually just put the entire photo of the moose here and then painted it out. But I knew that at the end of the day I would have been painting over more of than what was necessary. So that's why I only used the lower part. And you can imagine when I took the photo, right, this is the part where like he had no legs. So I had to determine where I was going to position this in my painting so that I didn't have to create legs. So if you have to create something that doesn't exist, there's another a good topic, is that when you have to create something that doesn't exist, like meaning if you have to choose in a picture if you're going to have to extend the side of a building or extend the park, the trees, I would say it's much easier to extend the building because it has lines, it has an easier way for us to visually fill in the blanks because our image doesn't cover the entire paper. So here I could have probably, researched and really looked up what a moose in motion looks like and try to paint that in, but it was just so much easier to drop them to the bottom, and then that way I don't have to paint with legs, right? So now I don't have to deal with this poor guy's legs, and I can just deal with the painting as it is. So I'm realizing that I have an imbalance in my colors, so I'm going to go in here and start to fix this a little bit. No, actually, you know what? Let's do what I always do. So I'm going to give it a little more softening up with some water. So again, trying to get more of the paint. Oh my gosh, that spray bottle is almost empty. So I'm going to soften this paint up a little bit, and I'm going to use a scratching tool. I'm inclined to use a knife, but okay, I'll start with a knife, and then I have all kinds of pottery tools that I tend to use. So I'll start with, maybe what I'll do is I'll start with this old pottery tool, which is just like a scraper kind of thing. It's not clean at all. It's got all kinds of stuff on it, but why I'm choosing this over a clean knife is because a knife I might just get a line, like a cut, a deep cut, and this might tear a little bit, which is actually what I'm going for, is I am trying to get some direction lines. So there is no good explanation for what I'm doing. It's just, this is my process, right? This is my roadmap. These random lines tell me what to do next. And that's the way I paint. Show, but for me, they give me a bit of an indication of what I should do next. And like I said, there's no good explanation for this because I have no idea why I do what I do. Just like I'm sure you guys have a lot of things that you do often within your own artistic endeavors that no one else seems to do, yet for some reason it works for you. Well, that's kind of how this works for me. So the other fun thing that I like to do, oh, my necklace just fell off, woo, fell down my shirt. Okay, so the other thing I like to do is the parts that come off quite easily, I generally tend to save them because if they're big enough, because I can recollage them in, and because they're already in the same color tone and the same vein as what I'm already creating, I already have instant collage paper made that I don't have to go and make later and have it integrate and work in my piece. So I'm just going to look at the time. Okay, so we have a few more minutes. But where I'm going to go with this just for today, because remember I told you I like to leave a painting wet, right? So because I'm not going to touch this till tomorrow, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in, and the parts that need to be glued down, glue them down. The parts that need to be stained, I'll stain them, and then we'll leave it nice and wet and then ready for tomorrow. So any parts that are coming off, I may sand it tomorrow once they're dry, and then again I may use some wax and iron it down. I don't know all the time what I'm doing, so I'm just at this point going to use a little bit of my thinned out black paint, and then where I have some obvious scratches or torn paper that I don't like, I might just go in and fix those a little bit with a little bit of stain. Like I said, I don't want to lose my definition of what this is. I don't want people at the end of the day to go, what is that? Is that a, I can't tell what that animal is. So I'm trying to make it less cryptic for people and more about a moose here than about a guessing game as to guess the animal. Because it's already a bit of a hard picture to see, right? So I'm just going to make it a little more obvious what it is we're looking at here. And you guys are only seeing it from afar, but I tell you from up close, some of these lines are really jumping out at me that it's sort of necessary. To give a little more definition. Oh, got the water bottle. It's failing me, so let's grab the other one. So the other thing I might do is just for a bit of continuity, I don't know what's going to happen with this area, but for now I'm just going to paint it out dark. And the reason for that is that I feel like this moose still feels a little too encapsulated, if you will. So I'm going to paint this out dark to give the background a bit more definition. It doesn't mean it's going to stay like this, it just means that for now it'll help my eye focus on the moose rather than a cutout of the moose. Integrate them a little more into the actual painting, but like I said, I don't know if this color is staying, but it's definitely helping the outline not be such an outline. And any scratches that I've already done are picking up that paint really nicely, so that if I decide to paint over it or whatever I decide to do, my lines will be a little more defined, which I think looks good. So again, this is really early to be making any decisions for the way I paint, but for the way you guys paint, it's not that you have to keep going, it's not that you have to destroy your painting, it's not that you have to follow any guidelines. Just make sure that when you are going larger, that like you consider of a whole, right? So, so by painting out the entire bottom of this this moose, I'm making you focus on him rather than on the outline around him, and then figuring out how it works into the rest of the painting. It's also making me realize that the top part of this painting is really, you can see here, it's really needing some darkness. And it may not stay, but it really is, whoops, there goes the necklace for good. It really is bringing your eye to the top, because right now I just had you looking at the bottom. So, we've got a little, just a little stained ridge. Like I said, it may not be the way it stays, more background, but now it's just bringing your eye out there, and that's just like on the markup tool. To me, it's very what's the word I'm looking for? Non-committal. Okay, so once I do a little dark stain up there, I can always lighten it up. I can always change this color down here, but the focus for today was making sure that we see the whole thing as this 48-inch painting and not just little chunks and little sections. Always treat it like a big painting, If you're going to do one little thing over here, make sure you do another big thing over here. So balance it out, small, big, big, small. Lines, whatever. Just make sure you're not focusing too much on one little small part of the painting. You can always fine tune as we get closer to the end of the painting. But at the beginning, we're thinking broad, right? Broad brush strokes, broad gestures, big images, big backgrounds, big brush strokes, big everything. So thank you all for watching, and stay creative. Remember that, stay creative. And yeah, okay, bye everybody. See you tomorrow.